The moment Harper leaned across the kitchen island and narrowed her eyes at me, I knew she wanted an audience for my humiliation. Aaron stood behind her shoulders rigid, pretending to scroll through his phone as if the tension in the room weren't thick enough to choke on. Harper's voice sliced the air cleanly coldly as she said, "Go ahead, Elias. If you're so brave, just leave. You wouldn't last a week without us." Her smile sharpened when she saw my expression falter. She expected me to sputter, to defend myself, to cling to the place she'd spent months convincing me was home. Instead, something inside me, something quiet, patient, beaten down by grief, but not destroyed, shifted. I reached into my pocket, removed the keys to the lake house, and set them gently on the cool marble. The metal clicked softly but echoed like a dropped hammer. Aaron didn't speak. He didn't move. He didn't even look at me. Harper lifted her chin, victorious, as if she had just executed a flawless checkmate. "Thought so," she murmured. I walked out the front door without a suitcase, without a plan, without the faintest idea where I would sleep that night. The cold Michigan wind wrapped around me, biting my skin, but I felt strangely calm, as if the night itself approved of my escape. I reached the end of the driveway when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I almost ignored it until a low voice said, "Mr. Ward, you may want to check your late wife's will. It's not what they think." The call ended before I could speak. And suddenly, leaving wasn't the end of something, it was the beginning. I drove through the wooded roads in silence, the tires hissing against damp pavement. My old pickup rattled on every curve, the engine groaning like an aging dog forced out into the cold. But my hand stayed steady on the wheel. I had expected to feel panic, maybe even regret, but instead, I felt clarity, like someone had wiped condensation from a fogged window. The unknown caller's warning replayed again and again. "Check your wife's will." Marjorie had been meticulous, thoughtful, always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. She had handled our family's finances for decades with the same quiet competence she brought to everything she touched. But after she died 18 months ago, I had let Harper steer me through the legal aftermath. Not because I trusted her, but because I trusted my son. And my son trusted her. A mistake I was beginning to see in sharper focus. By the time the sky had deepened into ink and the rain had turned into a fine silver mist, I reached the first place that felt remotely safe. Graham Pollard's old hunting cabin. Graham had been my closest friend, a surveyor who loved the solitude of the northern woods more than anything. Before he passed, he told me, "If you ever need to disappear, Elias, come here. This cabin won't ask any questions." Tonight, that sounded like salvation. I unlocked the door and stepped into the dark, stale air. Dust motes shimmered in my flashlight beam. Tools lined the walls just as Graham left them. A flannel jacket still hung near the stove, untouched by time. The place smelled like sawdust gun oil and pine sap, comforting in its roughness. I set my phone wallet and the crumpled contents of my pockets on the table. Then, I sat breathing deeply as the adrenaline finally tapered off. Harper's face flashed across my memory, the satisfied tilt of her head, the smirk that never reached her eyes. She had been tightening her grip on the household for months. At first it seemed harmless, organizing bills, coordinating meals, offering to lighten the load, as she called it. Then she began correcting me in front of guests, suggesting I was forgetful, telling Aaron that grief was affecting my stability. And Aaron, my son, my only child, started echoing her words. "Dad, let Harper handle this. You don't need the stress. Dad, maybe it's time to step back a little. Just for a while." I didn't see it at the time. Grief clouds your judgment. It softens you. It dulls your instincts. But now, sitting in Graham's cabin, the fog was lifting. The phone buzzed again. A text this time. They moved fast after she died. Too fast. My stomach tightened. Who was sending these messages? And why now? I tried calling the number back, but it went straight to voicemail. The world outside the cabin felt too large, too dark, suddenly full of unseen watchers. I locked the door out of habit more than fear and returned to the table. My hands rested on the wood, steady but heavy. I thought of Marjorie, her soft voice, her steady hands, her eyes that always seemed to know more than she said. Toward the end, she had grown quieter, contemplative. I'd chalked it up to the illness, to fatigue. But now, I wondered if she had seen something, suspected something, tried to warn me. My throat tightened. I stood pacing the small space. The floor creaked beneath my boots. Rain tapped steadily on the roof like fingers trying to get inside. With every step, my mind replayed the last year, the little slights, the subtle controls, the misplaced paperwork, the way Harper slowly repositioned herself as the decision-maker in Aaron's life. When did kindness become a cage? At nearly midnight, exhaustion overcame suspicion. I curled onto the old cot in the corner, pulling a blanket around me. But sleep didn't come. Images of the lake house flickered behind my closed eyes, the photos Harper removed from the hallways, the days she talked over me, the way she swooped in on paperwork before I could read it. Then, Aaron's silence at the kitchen island. That silence had cut deeper than any words Harper uttered. Just as I was about to drift off, headlights swept across the cabin wall. My eyes snapped open. A vehicle slowed on the gravel road outside, then appeared to pause before driving on. Had Harper sent someone, a private investigator? Was the mysterious caller following me? The truck rumbled off into the distance, but my pulse kept racing long after. I forced myself to breathe slowly, evenly. I was safe for now. More importantly, I had to decide what to do next. I reached for my phone once more and opened the voicemail box. No new messages. Whoever had called me wasn't leaving trails. Check your wife's will. I needed to see everything Marjorie left behind, the papers, the notebooks, the legal drafts she'd worked on before she died. Harper had managed all of it. She insisted on it. She said it was too painful for me to sort through. I believed her. Now that felt like the first step in a much larger deception. I sat up, feeling the old engineer in me awaken. I knew how to find structural weaknesses, how to dismantle systems built on faulty foundations. And something about the last year, the speed of Harper's takeover, the changes at the company, the subtle ways she controlled access to information, felt engineered. The most dangerous structures aren't the ones built poorly. They're the ones built with intention. I picked up the keys to the truck again. Tomorrow I would go back for Marjorie's documents. Tomorrow I would pull the first thread. As I lay back down, ready to force myself into a few hours of restless sleep, my phone buzzed one final time. A text. Just 3 words. They're watching you. I sat up in the darkness, pulse hammering. Whether it was a warning or a threat. I knew one thing. The war Harper thought she'd already won was just beginning. I woke before sunrise, the cold air biting at my lungs as I pushed the cabin door open and stepped onto the damp wooden porch. The forest was quiet, too quiet, nothing but the low hum of distant wind moving across the treetops. I hadn't slept more than an hour. My mind kept circling back to Harper's words, to the phone call that came right after I fled, and to the steady realization that my life had not unraveled overnight. It had been dismantled slowly, intentionally, piece by piece. I gripped the railing, feeling the age-worn wood beneath my palms, and reminded myself I had left on my own terms. But the truth was harder to swallow. I hadn't left until I was pushed, and Harper had been pushing me for a long time. Inside the cabin, faint gray light seeped through dusty windows. I set water to boil on the old stovetop, feeling the silence settle around me like a second skin. As I waited, memories tugged at me, sharp and unwelcome, at first then unfolding with a clarity grief had once blurred. The months after Marjorie died had been a haze. I remembered drifting from room to room in the house she and I shared for decades, unable to bear the stillness she left behind. Aaron had appeared one afternoon, gentle but persistent, asking me to stay with him and Harper until you can get back on your feet, Dad. You shouldn't be alone right now. His eyes had been earnest, and I was too hollowed out to refuse. For a time, living with them felt like relief. Harper cooked dinners, checked in on me, kept the house lively. Her early kindness felt real. Or maybe I simply needed it to be real. After years of caregiving, grief had exhausted every part of me. I let her take the lead on things that once would have seemed absurd: mail sorting, household bills, doctor's appointments. She insisted she only wanted to help lighten the load. But slowly the load shifted entirely onto me. Not the kind meant to help a grieving man heal, but the kind meant to make him dependent. I remember the first time Harper corrected me in front of guests. I had misremembered the year Erin graduated college only by 1 year, and Harper cut in with a soft laugh, smoothing her hand across her dress as she said, "Oh, Elias, you've been forgetting things lately." The table laughed politely. Erin didn't correct her. I thought nothing of it then. But it kept happening. Little things, unimportant on their own, insidious when placed together. Harper answering questions directed at me. Harper helpfully keeping track of my medications. Harper telling Erin that I misplaced my keys again when she had moved them. Harper taking messages from the company, telling callers I was resting. At first I thought she simply wanted order, structure. Now I saw she wanted control. The kettle whistled sharply, snapping me out of the memory. I poured hot water into the chipped cabin mug and sat at the table, letting the steam fog my glasses. I felt foolish for not seeing the shift more clearly. But grief blinds good men in ways ambition never blinds the wrong ones. The worst part wasn't Harper's words. It was the moment I realized kindness had become a cage, and I had helped her build it. I took a slow sip of the bitter coffee and stared at my phone lying on the table. The unknown caller's warning still pulsed in the back of my mind. Check your wife's will. A simple sentence with the weight of a hammer blow. I hadn't thought about Marjorie's will in months. Harper had handled the paperwork. She'd said it would be too painful for me to go through. I had believed her. Or maybe I hadn't wanted to admit how easily I let someone else take over. I unlocked my phone. No new messages. But I couldn't shake the sensation of eyes watching me, of footsteps on gravel outside the night before. Someone knew more than they should. Someone cared enough or feared enough to warn me. I set the mug down and forced myself to think logically, the way I once approached engineering problems. If someone moved too fast after Marjorie died, then Harper's sudden generosity wasn't generosity at all. It was preparation. She didn't want to take care of me. She wanted access to me, to my name, to whatever Marjorie left behind, and maybe toward infrastructure too. The thought stung sharper than the cold morning air. That company had been my life's work. I founded it before Erin was even born. I built it from a single contract and a drafting desk in a rented garage. To think Harper had designs on it not out of passion, but ambition, made my chest tighten. I stood and paced the narrow cabin, replaying small details I had brushed off before Harper, insisting on reviewing mail before I saw it. Harper telling me not to worry about certain documents. Harper casually mentioning Erin's future at the company, as if she were grooming him for something bigger than either of us realized. And then there was the day I overheard her on the phone. I had been walking down the hall when her voice drifted out of the office, low and clipped. As long as he stays under my roof, everything stays controllable. Don't rush me. When she realized I was at the door, she smiled as if nothing had happened. But that tone, sharp, commanding, cold, wasn't meant for a family member. It was meant for a co-conspirator. I hadn't wanted to believe she was speaking about me. But it was clear now. She had never wanted me under her roof. She wanted me under her thumb. My pulse quickened as I remembered something else small, but suddenly significant. A consulting invoice Harper had forced into my hand one morning asking for a quick signature before breakfast. It had a ward infrastructure header. She said it was for household administrative optimization. I had signed without looking closely, trusting it was a minor expense. But what if it was more than that? I dug through my coat pockets, sifting past receipts and crumpled napkins until I found the envelope she had shoved at me. I slid the document out and unfolded it slowly. A consulting invoice, approved digitally. But my digital signature had never been set up. Marjorie insisted on paper signatures for everything related to the company. A cold sensation crawled across my skin. Harper didn't just want influence over the household. She wanted influence over the company as well. Before I could spiral deeper, my phone buzzed again. Follow the documents. No sender name, no explanation. My heart thudded. Whoever this was, they weren't guessing. They knew exactly what they wanted me to see. I pocketed the phone and stepped outside. The morning fog drifted low across the tree line, soft and eerie. I walked around the cabin, scanning the ground. Fresh tire tracks crossed the gravel, newer than the night before. Someone had been back. Watching. Waiting. A chill swept through me, but resolve settled just as quickly. Harper hadn't just tried to humiliate me. She had tried to erase me. Erase my voice. Erase my influence. Erase everything Marjorie and I had built. I clenched my jaw. No more. I returned inside and sat at the table. For a long moment, I stared at the invoice, at my forged signature, at the cracks in the foundation of Harper's carefully curated world. She thought I would crumble when I walked out, that I would crawl back broken begging, that I would prove her right, that I couldn't last a week without her. But she forgot something important. I wasn't just a grieving widower. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't a man falling apart. I had built an empire with my own hands. I had solved problems bigger than her ego, survived challenges harsher than her cruelty. And most importantly, I knew how to follow a trail. I stood, grabbed my keys, and shouldered my coat. I would go back to the place Harper didn't want me to go. The place she had kept me from since the funeral. The place where Marjorie's documents still waited untouched. Our old home. If Harper thought kindness made me weak, she was about to learn what real strength looked like. And if someone was watching me, they were about to see the first step of a man who'd stopped allowing others to steer his life. I locked the cabin door behind me and whispered into the cold morning air, "You wanted me gone, Harper. Now watch where I go." By the time I reached Graham Pollard's deeper, more secluded cabin, a place even Aaron had never visited, the morning fog had thickened into a pale curtain between the trees. The road narrowed into a dirt path barely visible beneath fallen leaves. My tires crunched softly as I pulled up to the weathered structure tucked against a ridge of rock and pine. Graham had always joked that this was the place you came when you didn't want to be found. Today I couldn't think of anywhere better. I killed the engine and stepped out. The air was crisp, still carrying the faint metallic scent left behind by the storm. For a long moment I simply stood there, listening to the hush of the forest. No footsteps on gravel, no headlights sweeping through the trees, no whisper of someone following. I exhaled slowly and walked to the cabin door. The key, old and rusted at the edges, slid into the lock with a reluctant groan. Inside, the dimness greeted me like an old friend. Dust layered the surfaces, curl-edged maps hung on the wall, and Graham's tools rested exactly where he'd left them years before. I flicked on a lantern and set it on the table. I hadn't opened the metal storage box in months, not since the days when grief swallowed everything whole. It sat tucked beneath Graham's workbench, the same place I had shoved it, when Aaron convinced me to move in with him and Harper. I'd barely looked at it back then. Even touching Marjorie's handwriting had been too much. Now it felt like the first thread I needed to pull. I dragged the box into the open and crouched beside it. The latch stuck stubborn with age, but eventually snapped open. Inside were scattered envelopes, folded letters, financial statements, and items I hadn't had the courage to examine when Marjorie first passed. Her handwriting stared back at me. Neat. Graceful. Steady. My chest tightened. Gently, I lifted a stack of papers out and placed them on the table near the lantern. Among them was a sealed cream envelope, my name written across the front in Marjorie's unmistakable script. For when you are ready. I ran my thumb over the words, tracing the familiar loops. She must have written it during those last quiet weeks when I mistook her silence for exhaustion instead of suspicion. But I couldn't read it yet. Not until I saw what else she left behind. I set the envelope aside and reached back into the box. Below old sympathy cards lay a USB drive in a small labeled pouch, Ward Estate Private. I didn't remember this. Marjorie must have tucked it away during the illness, long before Harper started inserting herself into our affairs. Beneath the USB sat several unopened envelopes from the auditing firm that had worked with Ward Infrastructure for years. I frowned. Why were they addressed to me yet still sealed? Why hadn't I seen them when they arrived? A memory flickered. Harper standing in my foyer, 6 months after the funeral, collecting the day's mail. "These look boring, Elias," she'd said with a bright smile. "I'll sort them and save you time." She sorted them all right. She sorted them straight into her plans. I opened the first envelope. Inside was a preliminary report showing irregular access to protected company documents, not by me, but under my credentials. My skin prickled. The timestamps were months after I'd stopped going into the office. As I flipped through the remaining envelopes, the pattern became undeniable. Someone had been digging into Ward Infrastructure, its assets, accounts, internal policies using my authorization. Someone who lived under the same roof. My breath came slower now, steadier. I felt the shift inside myself, the way I once felt a steel beam settle into position, while constructing a bridge heavy, permanent, irreversible. I reached for another stack of documents taken from the metal box. Among them was a revised version of Marjorie's will with updates dated 6 months before her passing. My pulse jumped. I sat down and read it. She had placed the lake house in a trust, ensuring it remained protected from external marital claims. That meant Harper could never touch it. Marjorie had also reinforced that our Ward Infrastructure shares required my explicit approval for any succession planning. The updates completely blocked any attempt to maneuver me into forced retirement. But why had I never seen this version, and why had Harper insisted she handle all final documents after the funeral? I turned the page and felt my breath catch. Initials lined the margins, but not Marjorie's. These initials were uneven, cramped, almost like someone trying to imitate her style. My stomach twisted. The implications were too large, too dangerous to fully accept all at once. I reached for the next item in the box, a slim folder held together by a binder clip. The title read, Ward Infrastructure Internal Evaluation, prepared by H. Ward. H. Ward. Harper Ward. I opened it carefully. Inside were structured plans, timelines, budget predictions, restructuring charts. But not the kind that strengthened a company. These were designed for takeover. It outlined consolidating assets into shell subsidiaries, changing management sign-off channels, shifting authority from the founder's office to an interim executive team. And at the top of the executive succession chart, Aaron's name, followed by Harper as senior advisor, strategy. My jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. Attached to the evaluation was a printed email with redacted recipients, but one line was clear. Phase 2 begins once E. Ward's capacity is formally questioned. I skimmed through the remaining documents with rising dread. Then I saw it. A single-page executive summary labeled Succession Event Trigger A. It detailed an automatic transition of leadership authority if I were ever declared unfit or incapacitated. It listed parameters for mental instability, emotional impairment, and inability to fulfill fiduciary responsibilities. The signature approving the clause, apparently mine, was nothing more than a poor digital scan, a crooked imitation with jagged edges. I pressed my fingers to my forehead, trying to steady myself. Harper hadn't just manipulated my grief, she had used it to wedge herself into every corner of my personal and professional life. And she had worked from the assumption that I wouldn't realize until it was too late. My pulse jumped as my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and read the message. Stop calling people from your past. Some of them can't help you anymore. A thin layer of cold spread down my spine. I hadn't called anyone except my lawyer, Diana Rokes. She'd vanished, her office closed, her number disconnected. I'd been confused earlier, but now that confusion hardened into something far darker. Someone didn't want me accessing legal help. Someone was isolating me. And that someone wasn't acting alone. I stared at the documents again. The forged signatures, the hidden will, Harper's strategic corporate plans. The picture sharpened. Harper had been systematically clearing out every support structure I could use. Friends, professionals, legal allies, my son, even my identity as the company's founder. This wasn't a conflict. It was a coup. I closed my eyes and inhaled slowly. The musty pine-scented air of Graham's cabin filled my lungs. I let the truth settle through me like cold water. This was not the work of a careless opportunist. This was engineered. I looked toward the sealed envelope with Marjorie's handwriting. My hands shook as I lifted it. Her script was soft and steady, just as it always had been. I broke the seal. Inside was a letter with just one line visible before the fold. Elias, if you're reading this, they've already started. My lungs froze mid-breath. I turned the page ready for whatever my wife had known, whatever she had tried to tell me before she ran out of time. But just as my eyes reached the next sentence, a branch snapped outside. Someone was close. Too close. I looked up sharply toward the window, heart pounding, Marjorie's letter trembling in my hands. Something or someone moved in the shadows, and I realized that the secrets I had just uncovered were dangerous enough to make me a target. Dangerous enough that whoever had started this might already know I was undoing their work. The first thread had been pulled, and everything built on my name was beginning to unravel. The branch snapped again, closer this time, loud enough to rattle the window pane. I froze Marjorie's letter half open in my hands. The words blurred as adrenaline surged through me. Graham's cabin was remote enough that no one ever wandered by accident. Anyone out there was here with intention. I moved away from the window, quietly folding the letter and slipping it into my jacket. My breath steadied slow and controlled the way it had during long nights in the engineering field, when a single mistake could collapse an entire structure. I scanned the room for anything I could use as a weapon, eventually settling on an old splitting axe propped against the wall. Another rustle came from behind the cabin, too heavy to be an animal. I extinguished the lantern. The cabin plunged into darkness. Footsteps pressed softly against damp leaves. I edged toward the front door, crouched low, listening. Whoever was outside wasn't making an attempt to conceal their movement, but they weren't approaching directly either. They circled. They watched. They waited. My phone vibrated, the screen glowing faintly in the darkness. A text from an unknown number again. Don't be afraid. I'm not here to hurt you. I didn't believe it for a second. I crouched lower, glancing toward the back of the cabin. A silhouette, slender, unmoving, stood at the edge of the tree line. I could see the suggestion of a hood, a face turned in my direction. Another message appeared. We need to talk before Harper realizes what you found. My pulse hammered in my ears. Whoever this was, they knew exactly what I had been looking through. They knew I had documents. They knew I had found the will. But how I stepped closer to the window to get a better view. The figure lifted a hand slowly, palm facing out, not threatening but cautious, as if trying not to startle a wild animal. I tightened my grip on the axe. My phone buzzed again. Please, it's about Aaron. You don't know what he's caught in? My stomach clenched. Whatever Harper was planning, she wouldn't have spared my son, not if he served her ambitions. But hearing someone else mention his name sparked something more primal. Fear. Protective instinct. I typed back with shaking fingers. "Who are you?" The reply came almost instantly. "A friend of Marjorie's." "And yours?" Let me show you what she couldn't. A cold wave rippled through me. Marjorie. She had kept so much from me at the end. Why wouldn't she mention someone helping her? Why wouldn't she tell me she had allies, unless she'd been too afraid of who might be listening? Unless she'd known even then that someone close was watching her. A soft voice called out from the woods. "Elias Ward." I'm not here to cause trouble. Not Harper's voice, not Aaron's, not anyone I recognized. I hesitated, then moved toward the door, cracking it open an inch. The cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and rain. The figure stepped slightly into the faint light, the beam from my dying lantern catching just enough of her face to reveal sharp features and tired eyes beneath the hood. "I'm Julia Avery," she said softly. "I worked with Marjorie. She trusted me." I kept the axe tight in my hand. "Prove it." She held out a silver bracelet. My breath caught. Marjorie had worn that bracelet for over 20 years. She had lost it in the final months of her illness. I'd torn the house apart looking for it. Julia's voice wavered. "She gave this to me the night before she passed. She said if anything happened to you, I'd know." Emotion hit me hard in the chest. It wasn't possible. But grief had taught me that the impossible sometimes hid in plain sight. I let my guard down just slightly. "How did you know I'd be here?" I asked. "Because Harper's been watching your movements for months. She had access to your phone. She had access to your location logs." But this cabin, Julia gestured. It wasn't on her radar. It was on Marjorie's. I stepped fully outside now, the axe still at my side, but lowered. "Why come now?" Julia pulled a folder from beneath her coat. "Because the documents you found today, Marjorie copied them. She knew someone might try to destroy the originals." I swallowed hard. "And because," Julia continued, "Aaron is in danger, he doesn't understand. Harper is using him to get to Ward infrastructure. And once she's done with him, he'll be disposable." Her words landed like stones. "Come back inside," I said quietly. We stepped into the cabin. I relit the lantern. Julia set the folder on the table and flipped it open. Inside were copies of the same documents I'd found, but with handwritten notes in Marjorie's unmistakable script. Notes dated more than a year before she died. Notes that mapped out Harper's influence step by step. "She figured it out early," Julia said. "She tried to confront Harper once gently. Harper reacted with veiled hostility. After that, Marjorie began documenting everything. But when she realized how far Harper's plan reached, she didn't tell me," I whispered. "She wanted to. But she didn't trust that it was safe. Not with Harper living under the same roof. Not with Aaron so intertwined." Julia hesitated, then added, "And not with someone else involved. Someone bigger." A cold pressure tightened in my chest. "What do you mean?" Julia slid the final page across the table, a printed email with a corporate letterhead I recognized instantly. Ridgefall Group. My competitor. My largest corporate rival. A company with a history of hostile takeovers and strategic acquisitions. And on the email payment confirmation, consulting records, communication logs, all tied to one name, Harper Ward. "She was working with them," I whispered. "Working for them," Julia corrected. "They coached her, funded her, gave her the blueprint to infiltrate your company through your family. She wasn't acting alone, Elias. She was part of a coordinated attempt to push you out and absorb Ward infrastructure." I staggered back, gripping the chair. Ridgefall had been circling us for years, offering buyouts, sending recruiters after our engineers, undermining bids. But this was something darker. "They planned to destabilize you personally," Julia said, voice steady. "Because Ridgefall couldn't beat Ward infrastructure on merit. They had to make you appear incapable, outdated, declining. And Aaron," my voice cracked, He's part of the succession strategy. They needed him to step into leadership under Harper's control. I felt the air leave my lungs. Julia touched the folder gently. Marjorie knew. She tried to warn you through her will, through documents, through me. But she ran out of time. Silence stretched through the room, heavy and unyielding. I finally spoke. Why help now? Julia's expression softened. Because Marjorie saved my job once, because she believed in protecting what good people build. And because if I don't help you, Ridgefall will finish what they started. I inhaled sharply. What do they want from me now? Everything Julia said. Your shares, your name, your silence. And if you get in the way, your reputation. I steadied myself, feeling something shift deep inside. A weight lifting, a spine straightening, a resolve settling like steel. Then they're about to realize they picked the wrong man to bury, I said quietly. Julia nodded once. I believe that's exactly what Marjorie hoped you'd say. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed loudly on the table. A message from Harper. Where are you then? Another. Come home, Elias. We need to talk. Julia's eyes lifted to mine. She's realizing you're moving, she said, and she's losing control. For the first time since the night I walked out of that house, I felt the old strength rising in me, the strength Harper thought she had extinguished. I folded Marjorie's letter carefully and slipped it into my jacket. Let her wonder, I murmured. Let her fear it. The storm rolled in faster than expected, swallowing the last traces of daylight as Julia and I left the deeper cabin. The road leading back toward Briar Hollow twisted through miles of thick forest. The kind of terrain where headlights felt swallowed by darkness. My wipers scraped rhythmically across the windshield, fighting the sheets of rain. Julia sat beside me, her shoulders tense, hands clasped tightly around the folder she had brought. Every few minutes, lightning flickered across her face, revealing the exhaustion etched into her features. She had risked a great deal by coming to me more than she had admitted, and the weight of that risk lingered between us. We don't have much time, she said quietly, her voice nearly drowned by the storm. Harper will realize soon enough that you didn't run to a hotel or a friend's house. She'll start guessing where you might have gone. I kept my focus on the winding road. She doesn't know about Graham's cabin. No, Julia agreed, but Ridgefall employs people whose job is to figure things out. They're not the type to leave loose ends. I stiffened at the warning. I had built my company through grit, trust, and integrity. Ridgefall had built theirs through other means. Tell me everything, I said. Julia exhaled slowly. Ridgefall Group first approached Harper almost a year before Marjorie fell ill. They identified you as a barrier to expansion. Ward Infrastructure is one of the last privately held engineering firms of your size in Michigan. They couldn't pressure you through shareholders. They couldn't outbid you on contracts. So they found a weak point. Me. I said the word tasting bitter. No, Julia corrected gently. Your grief, your faith in people, your son. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. She continued. They needed someone inside your home. Someone persuasive enough to exploit trust. Someone who could slowly isolate you from your company while positioning Aaron as a puppet executive. Harper was ambitious, charming, and already in transition between careers. She was perfect for them. I forced myself to keep breathing evenly. And Aaron never saw it. He saw what she wanted him to see, Julia replied. Harper studied him the way predators study prey. She offered comfort when he felt overlooked. She fed him compliments when he doubted his abilities. She shaped him into a man who believed he needed her to succeed. Lightning flashed again. The road turned sharply, water pooling along the edges. I slowed the truck, letting her words sink deeper. I had failed him in ways I didn't understand until now. Did Marjorie know? I asked softly. She suspected, Julia said. More than that, she feared the possibility. She started documenting inconsistencies months before her diagnosis. When she grew too weak to investigate, she asked me to continue. And the documents in the box are only a portion of what she found. Julia placed a hand on the folder in her lap. She wanted you to have the full truth when you were strong enough to handle it. The ache in my chest spread heavier than grief, but steadier too. Marjorie had been fighting for our family until the end, even while her own life slipped away. As we approached the outskirts of town, Julia reached over and touched my arm lightly. Elias, you need to prepare yourself. What you're going to see in that house tonight won't be easy. I've already seen more than I ever wanted to, I murmured. No, she said firmly. You've seen the surface. Harper doesn't hide her cruelty from you, but she hides everything else. I didn't reply. The truth was already a roaring in my ears. When we finally pulled into the narrow service road behind my old home, the one Marjorie and I built with sweat and laughter 30 years ago, the storm seemed to pause, holding its breath. The house sat dark except for a single light in the upstairs hallway. Julia pointed at it. She's awake. I cut the engine. We stepped out into the wet grass, rain misting lightly around us. Julia motioned for us to move quietly along the side of the house. We reached the back entrance just as a shadow flickered across the kitchen blinds. She's pacing, Julia whispered. She knows something is wrong. I swallowed hard and unlocked the door. When we stepped inside, the familiar scent of cedar and lemon oil hit me, a scent that belonged to Marjorie, not Harper. For a moment, the weight of memory pressed down so sharply I could barely breathe. But then, I heard voices. Low, urgent. Julia motioned for me to follow her through the hallway. We stopped just outside my old study. Harper stood inside her back to the door, rifling frantically through the filing cabinet. Paper rustled wildly around her. She moved with the desperation of someone searching for a life raft in a sinking ship. And then I saw the phone pressed between her shoulder and cheek, its screen glowing. She was on a call. Just tell me if he contacted you, she hissed into the receiver. I need to know who he talked to. No, I don't care how you find out, just do it. Julia's eyes met mine. A silent warning. Harper continued. He's acting different. Something happened. If he found anything, we need to shut it down before... She froze, because I stepped fully into the doorway. Her shoulders tensed. Slowly, she turned, her face arranged into a counterfeit smile. Elias, she purred. You're home. Put the phone down, I said quietly. She did, but her eyes narrowed ever so slightly, a calculation flickering behind them. You left without telling anyone, she went on, stepping closer. Aaron has been worried sick. We both have. Why didn't you call? Why didn't you stop? I cut in. Julia stepped into view behind me. Harper's expression twisted, not with fear, but recognition. Well, she said coolly, if it isn't Marjorie's pet project. Julia didn't react. She simply opened the folder and laid its contents on the desk. Harper's mask cracked. I wouldn't do that, Harper said sharply. I stepped closer to the desk and looked down. And there it was. A forged signature on a retirement directive. My name faked with astonishing skill. A formal request to reassign my consulting rights at Ward Infrastructure, also forged. A psychological evaluation claiming I was mentally compromised due to unresolved grief, signed by a doctor I'd never met. All meant to remove me. Legally, permanently. Ridgefall wasn't stealing my company. Harper was handing it to them. You forged these, I said, my voice low, steady. Harper laughed softly. Don't flatter yourself, Elias. I simply expedited what everyone already knew. You're too old to lead, too fragile to manage, too blinded by sentiment to make rational decisions. You don't get to decide that. No, she said, her smile thin and venomous, but the board does, and Ridgefall does, and Aaron will too once this is all settled. My breath caught. Aaron doesn't know what you're doing, I said. He doesn't need to, Harper replied. He just needs to sign where I tell him. That sentence lit something inside me, something cold and furious. "You're using him," I said. "I'm guiding him," Harper corrected. "He was drowning before me. You know that. He never felt good enough for you, never felt capable. I gave him confidence, purpose, a future. You gave him a cage." She stepped closer until we were only a foot apart. Her voice dropped. "You're the cage, Elias. You always were, and now it's time for you to disappear quietly." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Julia stepped forward. "It's over, Harper." Harper turned to her with a slow, contemptuous smile. "Oh, sweetheart, it hasn't even begun." She lunged for the documents, but I blocked her path. Julia swept the pages back into the folder. Something inside Harper snapped, then her expression morphing into something sharp and unhinged. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You ruined everything by not dying on schedule." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Julia grabbed my arm. "We need to leave, now." Harper reached for her phone again, dialing someone with frantic stabbing motions. "Get him," she shouted into the receiver. "I don't care how you bring him to me." Thunder cracked outside, Massa. Julia pulled me toward the door. And as the storm surged again, I realized Harper wasn't afraid of losing control. She was afraid of what I could do now that I finally saw the truth. And she had every reason to be. Julia and I didn't speak as we rushed out the back door and into the storm. Rain sheeted sideways, stinging my face as we ran toward the truck. The night swallowed every sound except the pounding in my ears and the crackle of distant thunder. I fumbled with the keys, breath coming hard, while Julia kept watch over her shoulder, her posture tense and ready. "She's calling someone," Julia said, "and it's not Aaron." I finally unlocked the truck. We climbed in, slamming the doors shut. But before I could start the engine, a car engine roared to life at the end of the driveway. Headlights flared, slicing through the storm. Harper's car. Except she wasn't driving. A dark figure sat behind the wheel face, obscured by rain and glass. The engine revved twice like a warning. Julia grabbed my arm. "Go! Now!" I didn't need convincing. I threw the truck into reverse, gravel spraying beneath us. The other car surged forward, blocking the main driveway. "They're trying to corner us," Julia said. "Take the back road." The back road was barely more than a muddy trail carved through dense woods. But it led to the old county highway, our only chance of escape. I floored the truck tires, fishtailing as we shot down the narrow path. Branches whipped the sides, leaving long scratches across the metal. The other car's headlights appeared briefly behind us before vanishing into the trees. For several minutes, all I heard was the rattling engine and Julia's heavy breathing. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced down, eyes widening. "It's Aaron." My chest tightened. "Answer it." She put the call on speaker. "Aaron, it's Julia. Your dad's here." "Where is he?" Aaron's voice cracked, drenched with panic. "Mom's losing it. She's tearing the house apart. She said he's trying to destroy her." "Dad, where are you?" I kept my eyes on the slippery road. "I'm safe for now." "Dad, she said she called Ridgefall. She said they're going to handle it. I don't know what that means, but she's scared. And when she's scared, the sound of crashing glass cut through the call. Aaron gasped. "She broke the cabinet door. Dad, she's looking for something." "I think she's looking for you." Julia mouthed one word to me. "Run." "We're okay," I told him. "But I need you to stay put. Don't go near her. Don't leave the house." "I can't stay here," Aaron said, voice trembling. "She's not herself. She keeps saying everything depends on tonight." "Dad, what's going on?" I hesitated. The truth wasn't simple. It wasn't even safe. "I'll explain everything soon," I said. "Just find somewhere safe. Please, son." The call cut abruptly. Julia winced. Signal dropped. Storm must be interfering, or someone had blocked it. The truck skidded as the back wheels hit a deep patch of mud. I jerked the wheel, regaining control. "We need a safe place," Julia said. "Somewhere Harper can't track." "Graham's cabin," I said. "No," Julia said quickly. "She might guess you'd go back there. And Ridgefall has people who can comb through your history. We need somewhere unexpected." I thought for a moment, letting instinct guide me. "There's one place," I said. "But it's not exactly welcoming. We're the old Ward's storage warehouse, 20 minutes west. No one's used it in years." "Perfect," Julia said. As the storm raged, I caught glimpses of my own reflection in the windshield, older, wearier, yet sharpened by something I hadn't felt in months' purpose. A sense of fight. "You okay?" Julia asked softly. "I'm thinking about Aaron," I said. "He sounded broken." "She's been tightening her grip on him for a long time," Julia said. "Manipulators don't act alone. They hollow out the people closest to them." Her words cut deeper than she intended. I gripped the wheel tighter. "We'll get him out," she added. The road merged with the county highway at last, and the truck steadied. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the dark outline of the storage warehouse in the distance, its metal siding, rusted roof partially sagging. I pulled around to the back entrance where the security lights had long since died. We stepped out into the rain, hurrying toward the side door. The padlock was old enough that one stiff blow with a crowbar, Julia found one leaning beside an abandoned crate, snapped it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the lingering smell of motor oil. My footsteps echoed across the concrete floor. Julia shut the door behind us. "This will work, at least for tonight." I walked deeper into the warehouse, past stacks of unused piping and old machinery. This place had once supplied the early infrastructure projects for the company. Now, it was a relic, a forgotten chapter of my life. "How did it come to this?" I murmured, barely realizing I'd spoken aloud. Julia approached quietly. "You trusted your family. You trusted your grief. That isn't weakness, Elias. It's being human." I didn't answer. Instead, I sat on an overturned crate and rubbed my hands over my face. Then a faint tapping sound drifted across the warehouse. Both of us froze. 3 soft taps. Then silence. Julia's hand moved to her coat pocket, fingers brushing something metallic. "We're not alone," she whispered. I scanned the shadows between the stacks. The storm outside masked footsteps. The warehouse felt suddenly smaller walls pressing inward. Then a voice emerged from the darkness. "Dad." My heart leapt. "Aaron," I stood quickly. "Son, how did you—" Aaron stepped forward, soaked through hair plastered to his forehead. He looked 10 years younger and 10 years older, all at once, frightened, lost, and desperate. "I tracked your phone," he said. "Mom disabled mine, so I used the house computer. I couldn't stay there anymore. She kept saying things about you, about the company, about how everything was going to collapse if I didn't do what she said." "Come here," I said, reaching for him. But he didn't move closer. Instead, he looked at Julia with wide, wary eyes. "Why are you with her?" Julia stepped back a careful distance. "I'm here because your mother isn't acting alone, and she isn't telling you the truth." Aaron shook his head. Rain dripped from his sleeves. "She told me Dad is confused, that he's being manipulated, that you were one of the people pushing him to doubt her." Julia lowered her voice. "And do you believe her?" Aaron's face crumpled with something like shame. "I don't know what to believe anymore." I stepped closer, keeping my voice steady. "Aaron, look at me." He lifted his eyes reluctantly. "You know me," I said. "You know who I am. Who I've been your entire life. Does anything about the last week make sense to you?" He swallowed hard. "No." "She isolated you," Julia said gently. "That's what people like her do." Aaron's hands trembled. "She kept saying we were a team, that I needed to trust her, that you were holding me back." I felt that like a blow, sharp and deep. Before I could speak, Julia reached into the folder again and pulled out a document. "Aaron," she said softly, "you need to see this." He stepped forward reluctantly. It was the forged succession plan, the one naming him interim executive with Harper, listed as his strategic advisor. Aaron read it, then reread it, jaw tightening. "I never signed this," he whispered. "No," I said. "But she planned for you to." He stared up at me, eyes filling with a mixture of anger and devastation. "Dad, I didn't know. I swear." "I know," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "She used your heart against you." He closed his eyes, shaking under the weight of realization. Then another sound echoed across the warehouse. A car door slamming. We all turned. Through a crack in the back window, headlights glowed. Harper's car. Aaron went pale. No, she followed me." Julia cursed under her breath. "We need to move, now." But I didn't move, because I heard her voice carry sharply through the storm. "Aaron, Elias, you can't hide in there forever." She wasn't alone. Multiple silhouettes moved behind her. Ridgefall silhouettes. I stepped between my son and the door. For the first time in months, I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready. "Stay behind me," I told Aaron. He did. The warehouse door creaked as it began to open. Julia whispered, "Elias, this is where everything changes." And I knew she was right. Because Harper hadn't come tonight to negotiate. She'd come to finish what she started. But so had I. The warehouse door groaned open, slow and deliberate, the hinges screeching beneath the weight of the storm-soaked metal. Cold air rushed inside, carrying the scent of wet asphalt and something darker, fear maybe. Harper stepped through the doorway, first umbrella snapping in the wind, her hair plastered to her face. She looked feral, electrified by rage and panic. Behind her, 4 men filed in. Not police, not company security. Ridgefall. Men plain clothes, broad shoulders, the kind of posture that said they'd done things no one wrote on paper. I stepped in front of Aaron, instinct overriding fear. Harper's eyes landed on him instantly. "Aaron, sweetheart," she said, voice trembling with manic sweetness. "Come here. You're not safe with them." Aaron didn't move. He pressed closer to me. Her smile faltered. Julia stood slightly behind me, one hand inside her coat, maybe gripping pepper spray or something sharper. She met Harper's gaze with unflinching calm. One of the Ridgefall men spoke first. "Mr. Ward," he said, voice oil-slick smooth. "We're here to escort you back home. There's been a misunderstanding. Mrs. Ward tells us you're unwell." The rage that rose inside me surprised even me. "I am not unwell," I said, stepping forward. "I'm done being controlled." The man lifted his hands as if calming a startled animal. "Let's not escalate," Julia cut him off. "You don't have authority here." He smirked. "Authority? We don't need authority. We need compliance." That was when Harper's mask cracked completely. "You were supposed to come home, Elias," she snapped. "You were supposed to let us handle everything. Instead, you're running around with her." She pointed at Julia, fury twisting her mouth, digging through things you were never meant to see. "I saw enough," I said. "You forged legal documents. You tried to take my company. You manipulated Aaron." At that, Aaron flinched. Harper noticed. She softened instantly, shifting from predator to victim. "Aaron, baby," she pleaded, "you know I did everything for us, for our future. Your father was cutting you out. He's been planning to retire and leave everything to outside managers." I saw the paperwork. "The paperwork you forged," Julia said flatly. Harper's eyes darted to her. "You don't know anything about this family." "I know what Marjorie documented," Julia replied. "And I know what Ridgefall paid you." A murmur rippled through the Ridgefall men, small, barely perceptible, but noticeable enough. Harper stiffened. "You're lying," Harper said, voice tightening. But her eyes betrayed her. Aaron stepped forward, voice trembling. "Mom, did you sign a deal with Ridgefall?" The storm outside thundered. For 3 heartbeats, no one breathed. Then Harper did the one thing that told Aaron everything. She didn't answer. She didn't deny. She just stared at him, her silence louder than a confession. Aaron staggered back as if she'd struck him. "You used me," he whispered. "You used me to get to Dad." "Aaron, no." Harper reached for him. He recoiled violently. "Don't touch me." That was when Harper snapped. "Fine," she spat. "Yes, Ridgefall approached me. Yes, they wanted Elias out. But I did it for you, for us, for your future. Without me, you were going nowhere. Your father never believed in you. He never saw your potential. I did." "No," Aaron said softly. "You saw my weakness." Harper's expression twisted into something vicious. "Weakness? You think I did all this because I needed you? I did it because you were easy? Because you believed anything I told you? Because you were the one piece of leverage I needed to move your father?" Tears filled Aaron's eyes. I reached for him, but he lifted a hand steady, heartbreaking. "Dad," he said quietly. "I'm okay," but he wasn't. I could tell. His world had cracked clean through. The Ridgefall leader stepped forward. "Enough drama. Mr. Ward, come with us." Julia positioned herself between him and me. "You touch him, you'll regret it." He raised an eyebrow. "You going to stop us?" Then he reached inside his jacket. I stepped in front of Julia instantly. But instead of a weapon, the man pulled out a slim metal case and opened it. Inside were 3 documents. "These," he said calmly, "are emergency succession contracts. 1 signature each from you, your daughter-in-law, and your son. Once executed, Ward Infrastructure becomes a Ridgefall subsidiary." Aaron stared at the papers as if they were poisoned. "I never signed anything," he whispered. The man smirked. "Someone did. Your signature appears very tidy." My pulse roared. "It's forged." "Prove it," the man said. "By the time you do, your company will be absorbed. Happens every day." Julia inhaled sharply. "Not with Marjorie's countermeasures." That caught the man's attention. "Countermeasures?" "She built legal protections you didn't know about," Julia said, "including an asset freeze if any unauthorized successor tries to take control." The man's smile faded. Harper's panic surged. "You idiot," she hissed at him. "I told you she was digging." Then she seemed to realize what she said. Too late. Julia stepped closer. "Thank you for confirming you both conspired." The situation became electric. The Ridgefall men stiffened. Harper backed toward the door. Aaron stared at her, stricken. "How long?" he whispered. "How long were you planning to take everything?" Harper's lips curled. "Since the moment your father trusted me." Julia's voice sliced through the tension. "We need to leave. Now." The Ridgefall leader hissed, "No one leaves." I positioned myself in front of Aaron, Julia flanking my side. For a man my age, I felt strangely immovable. Aaron took a shaky breath. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't want any of this. I didn't know. I know," I said, gripping his shoulder firmly. "But you're not her pawn anymore." He nodded, tears slipping silently down his face. Harper watched him cry and rolled her eyes. "Pathetic," she spat. "That did something to me. Something final. Something absolute." I stepped forward, voice low with controlled fury. "You need to understand something, Harper. You didn't break me. You didn't steal my company. You didn't win." Her nostrils flared. "Don't pretend you're strong. You walked out of that house with nothing." "No," I said quietly. "I walked out with everything you couldn't touch." "What's that?" she sneered. "My integrity, my son, my truth." She barked a laugh. "Truth won't save you. Ridgefall owns the narrative." Julia smirked. "Not anymore." She pulled her phone from her coat screen, glowing. A live call, with a recording icon blinking. The Ridgefall men stiffened. Julia said, "I sent everything we discussed, Harper's confession, your threats, the forged contracts, to the state corporate regulator." and to Ward Infrastructure's board, and to a reporter who's been investigating Ridgefall for 2 years. Harper blanched. The Ridgefall leader lunged forward, but Julia moved faster, stepping back as I blocked the man with every ounce of strength left in my body. "You're done," Julia told them. "All of you." The Ridgefall men exchanged looks, cold calculating. Retreat or escalation? Finally, the leader hissed, "This isn't over." Julia smiled faintly. "Oh, it is. You just haven't realized it yet." The men backed toward the door, collecting Harper as they went. She clawed at them, screaming Aaron's name. "Aaron, you can't leave me. You need me." Aaron shook his head, heartbroken but resolute. "No," he whispered. "I don't." The door slammed shut behind them. Silence flooded the warehouse. Aaron broke first, collapsing into a crouch, sobbing into his hands. I knelt beside him. "You're safe," I said quietly. "You're safe now." He leaned into me like he was 6 years old again. Julia exhaled shakily. "We need to get to the board before Ridgefall does something desperate." I nodded. But for this moment, I held my son as the storm raged outside. Harper and Ridgefall had tried to break us from within. But instead, they had forged something stronger. Truth, family, resolve. And our fight was only beginning. The storm eased by the time we reached the outskirts of the city, but the tension inside the truck only thickened. Aaron sat in the back seat, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles blanched. Julia rode beside me, scrolling through her phone, watching the live transfer of files she had sent to regulators and reporters. Every few seconds, the screen lit her face stern and determined. "We have maybe an hour before Ridgefall realizes those recordings hit the compliance servers," she murmured. "Once they do, they'll try to pivot the narrative." I kept my eyes on the road. Let them try. They're good at this, Elias. They'll spin your age, your grief, your sudden disappearance from the house. They'll say Harper intervened on behalf of a concerning cognitive decline. Aaron flinched at that. I tightened my grip on the wheel. Then we bring them proof that decline was manufactured. Julia nodded. The board needs to see the truth before press coverage hits. If Ridgefall contacts them first, it'll be damage control instead of justice. Ahead, the city lights shimmered beyond wet asphalt. Ward Infrastructure's headquarters rose at the center glass towers, reflecting a sky still fractured with storm clouds. It had been months since I last stepped foot inside. Part of that was my own doing, drowning in grief. Part of it was Harper's doing, drowning me in control. When we parked behind the executive wing, Aaron didn't immediately get out. He stared at the building with a hollow expression. "Dad," he said quietly, "what if they won't believe us? What if they think I'm part of it?" "You were manipulated," I said. "There's a difference." His throat bobbed. "I let her use me." I turned fully toward him. "You trusted someone you loved." "That's not a crime," Julia added gently. "Besides, we have evidence. Emails, call logs, succession drafts, and a recording of your wife confessing to corporate espionage," I said. Aaron winced at the word wife. That wound would take time. Finally, he nodded and stepped out of the truck. We entered through a back employee entrance. The night security guard recognized me instantly, eyes widening. "Mr. Ward?" "We weren't expecting, I know. I need access to the executive floor." He hesitated only long enough to glance at Julia's ID, an old consultant badge still hanging around her neck, before buzzing us through. The elevator ride was silent. My reflection in the steel panel looked older, sharper, stripped of illusion. Aaron's reflection looked younger, fragile, stripped of denial. Julia looked like someone ready for war. When the doors opened, the corridor lights flicked on automatically. The executive floor was empty at this hour, but tension lived in the walls. A decade of my life had taken shape here, contracts negotiated, teams, grown, infrastructure planned across the entire region. And Ridgefall had wanted to steal all of it. We approached the conference room. Light glowed underneath the door. Julia frowned. "Someone's here." I pushed it open. Inside sat 3 of the board members, Roberts, Keller, and Singh, each with a tablet glowing in front of them. Their heads snapped up as we entered. Roberts removed his glasses, taken aback. "Elias, we got an automated transfer of files." "Were you the source?" Singh added sharply. "We were just reviewing documents involving forged signatures and behavioral reports attached to your record." "What in God's name is happening?" I stepped forward, placing Julia's folder on the table. A long-planned manipulation. By Harper, by Ridgefall, and by anyone who believed removing me would open the company to acquisition. The board members exchanged glances, some confused, some concerned, some guilty. Keller leaned back, arms crossed. "I told the board months ago that Harper was pushing too hard for structural changes. But certain people here," he looked pointedly at Roberts, "thought she was just motivated." Roberts flushed. Julia calmly began laying out the evidence. "These documents show a coordinated effort to undermine Elias's authority, isolate him from company operations, and groom an interim successor. The goal was to force a transition event after which Ridgefall Group would initiate a takeover." Singh tapped her tablet. "These call logs. Harper's communications with Ridgefall executives?" Her eyes widened. "This isn't speculation. This is conspiracy." Aaron stepped forward, voice shaking but steady. "I didn't know what she was doing. She told me this was all for the company, for family unity. She said Dad was struggling emotionally. She made me believe." He stopped, swallowing hard. I placed a hand on his shoulder. The board members softened. Singh especially. "You trusted someone close? That's not culpability." Then Roberts hesitated before asking me the question I knew was coming. "Elias, are you well? Are you capable of returning these past months?" "My absence was engineered," I said sharply. "My competency was never in question. My grief was weaponized." The room absorbed those words. Julia drew out one last document, Marjorie's legally updated will and trust protections. Elias's late wife anticipated potential financial abuse. Her clauses prevent any unilateral succession changes unless verified by an external auditing firm. Ridgefall's contract dissolves under those terms. Silence stretched. Then Keller exhaled. "Well, Ridgefall miscalculated. Badly." Singh tapped her tablet again. "I'm calling an emergency motion. Right now." Aaron stepped back as she dialed the rest of the board members. Within minutes, screens lit up around the table, half the board joining via video call, startled but alert. Singh began crisply. "We have uncovered evidence of a deliberate attempt to usurp company leadership by external influence through family channels. Effective immediately, we must protect ward infrastructure with an asset freeze issue, cease and desist orders to Ridgefall Group, and open formal investigation into Harper Ward." Murmurs of agreement filled the digital room. Roberts sighed heavily. "This is going to explode publicly. Better the truth than a fabricated downfall," Singh replied. Then she turned to me. "Elias, what role do you want to assume moving forward?" It was a question I hadn't expected this soon. I looked at Aaron, his swollen eyes, his regret, his new resolve. Then I looked at Julia, her quiet bravery. Finally, I answered. "I don't want my position back, not the way it was. What I want is structural protection. For the company, for my son, for the truth. I'll serve as founder emeritus. Advisory only. Aaron will rebuild his own credibility with guidance, not direction." Aaron blinked, stunned. "Dad?" "I trust you," I said softly. "But trust needs foundation, not control." He nodded slowly, as if absorbing the meaning layer by layer. The board voted. Unanimous approval. It was done. For the first time in months, maybe years, my name wasn't being stolen or weaponized. It was being restored. We left the conference room together, the the weight of the night easing at last. In the elevator, Aaron leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. "I can't believe she did all this," he whispered. "I loved her. I thought she loved me," Julia answered gently. "People like Harper don't love. They attach. They consume. They calculate." Aaron flinched. I placed a hand on his back. "Love didn't make you blind, Aaron. Hope did." He nodded, tears slipping silently down. When the elevator doors opened to the lobby, the first rays of dawn had begun to pierce the storm clouds, golden light spilling across the floor. A new day, I thought. A day Harper never planned for. As we stepped toward the exit, Julia's phone buzzed. She read the message and stiffened. "It's from my contact in the regulator's office," she said. "What is it?" I asked. "They've just issued an official summons." She looked at me. "For Harper. For Ridge Falls Executive Council. For anyone listed in the conspiracy." Aaron's breath hitched. "Dad." "What happens now?" I looked toward the rising sun, feeling the storm finally break behind us. "Now," I said quietly. "Now we let the truth do what Harper never expected it survives." The sky had barely brightened when we stepped out of the building, but it felt like a different world entirely. The storm had passed, leaving the pavement slick and gleaming, and the air carried that strange, fragile calm that follows chaos. Aaron stood a few feet away, staring at nothing, hands buried in his pockets. He looked smaller somehow, like the foundation beneath him had been shattered, and he was still figuring out what pieces he could stand on. Julia checked her phone again, eyes skimming incoming updates. "Ridge Falls' silence is strange," she murmured. "Too quiet." I nodded. "They're regrouping. People like them don't panic, they retaliate." Aaron swallowed hard, stepping closer. "Dad, what do we do now? Harper won't just disappear. Ridgefall won't either. We wait," I said. "We move smart, and we let them make their next mistake." But even as I said it, I knew waiting wouldn't be idle. Waiting meant preparing, anticipating, fortifying. We climbed into the truck, and I drove toward the cabin where Lily had been staying. She'd insisted on helping, insisted on staying close to me when I left the house. Her strength had surprised me, not hard, but quiet and resilient, much like her grandmother. When we reached the long gravel drive leading to Graham's secondary cabin, I saw her silhouette standing in the doorway. She had a blanket wrapped around her shoulders and tension in her posture. The moment we stepped out, she ran toward me. "Grandpa," she cried, gripping my coat. "I heard shouting last night from town, and I saw cars going in every direction." "What happened?" I rested a hand on her back. "We're okay." But things changed fast. Her eyes shifted to Aaron, red-eyed shoulders slumped, looking like a man who'd walked through fire and hadn't yet figured out if he survived it. "Dad," she whispered. Aaron tried to speak, but emotion strangled the words. Lily crossed to him and wrapped her arms around him without hesitation. For the first time, he hugged her like he needed her to stay standing. I let them have that moment. They both deserved it. Inside the cabin, Julia laid the folder on the table again and began organizing the evidence. She was methodical, sharp, and calm, but her eyes darted toward the window every few minutes. "Something's coming," she murmured under her breath. "I can feel it." I could too. Harper was cornered. Ridgefall was threatened. And desperation made enemies reckless. Lily sat beside me as I tried to explain the situation in gentler terms. What Harper had done, how far it had gone, how easily trust can be manipulated. Her expression went from shock to anger to sorrow. "She used Dad," she whispered. "She used all of us." Aaron stared at the floor. "I helped her," he said quietly. "Without meaning to. I still helped her." "No," I said firmly. "She used your grief, your desire to be enough. That is not the same as helping." Aaron didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue. Julia joined us at the table, pushing her hair away from her face. We need backup. Someone who knows corporate law, someone who's seen schemes like this before. There's someone, I said slowly. But I haven't spoken to him in years. Who? Julia asked. Michael Graves, I said. He's a retired federal attorney. He worked with my wife once on a contract dispute. He owed Marjorie a favor. Julia lifted an eyebrow. You think he'd help? He will, I said, for her. I reached for my phone and dialed his number. It rang twice before a familiar gravelly voice answered. Elias Ward. Either this is a miracle or a problem. Both, I said. I explained everything. I expected skepticism, maybe even doubt. Instead, Graves's tone sharpened with each detail. You stay put, he said. Send the documents to the number I text you. I'll call 2 people I trust. We'll get ahead of this before Ridgefall can coordinate a counterstrike. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me yet, he replied. This is bigger than your family. Ridgefall has been trying to breach companies for a decade. If they used your daughter-in-law as a foothold, this isn't personal. It's strategic. He hung up. Julia exhaled. He's right. Harper is a symptom. Ridgefall's the disease. And they're not done, I said. Before I could elaborate, my phone buzzed again, this time with a voicemail alert. Unknown number. My stomach tightened. I put it on speaker. A man's voice, smooth, calm, and chillingly self-assured, filled the room. Mr. Ward, I imagine by now you've seen our name on certain documents. That's unfortunate because those were never meant for your eyes. We don't appreciate interference. You were supposed to retire quietly. Now you've forced our hand. Pull back or what remains of your legacy will burn. Lily's hand flew to her mouth. Erin paled. Julia reached for the phone. That's Dorian Shaw, she said. Ridgefall's strategist. If he's calling you personally, they're accelerating, I finished. Another text appeared before I could respond, this time from Harper. Elias, please, meet me tonight. No tricks. No Ridgefall. If we don't fix this, everything falls apart. Then another one. I didn't know they would take it this far. Julia frowned. She's cracking. They're abandoning her. Erin stared at the messages, jaw trembling. I don't know what to think anymore. I don't know who she is. She's not your problem now, I said gently. Not anymore. But he shook his head. She is. I married her. I believed her. I let her change me. No, Lily said softly from the other side of the room. She didn't change you. She used what was already hurting. Erin turned to her eyes, shining. I realized then that Harper had controlled him, not because he was weak, but because he was strong in all the wrong ways. Loyal, idealistic, hopeful. People like Harper prey on hope. People like Ridgefall weaponize it. Julia sat back at the table. We need a plan for tonight. Ridgefall will strike again. Harper may try to negotiate or manipulate. And Dorian Shaw, he doesn't make threats lightly. We're not meeting Harper, I said. Not until Graves and his people build a wall around this. But she might have information we need, Julia argued. She might have information Ridgefall wants gone, I countered. Silence settled. Then a shadow passed the window. Julia's eyes snapped upward. Did you see that Erin stood? Someone's outside. Lily gasped. It looked like no. That can't be. She stepped closer to the window. My pulse thudded. On the tree line, barely visible in the fading light, stood a figure. Umbrella. Pale coat, dark hair whipping in the wind. Harper, alone. She didn't move closer. She didn't call out. She just watched. Lightning illuminated the woods for one brief second, and her expression was unmistakable. Fear. Julia grabbed my arm. Do not go out there. But I was already stepping forward. Harper took one step back. Then she whispered something I couldn't hear, turned and disappeared into the trees. I stopped at the door, breath sharp. She wasn't here to threaten us. She was here because Ridgefall had turned on her. And if Ridgefall was cleaning up loose ends, Harper Ward had just become the most dangerous kind of woman, desperate. Julia shut the door behind me. We need to move. They're circling her. They'll circle us next. Aaron looked at me, scared, but determined. Dad, what do we do now? I inhaled deeply, feeling a shift inside me. Something rising, steadying, aligning. We stop reacting, I said, and we start leading. Julia nodded slowly. Then tonight we prepare. And tomorrow, I said, we finish this. Lily came to my side, slipping her hand into mine. Grandpa, she whispered. Are you scared? I squeezed her hand gently. I was, I admitted, but not anymore. Because now, for the first time, I saw the battlefield clearly. Harper was breaking, Ridgefall was exposed, Aaron was waking up, and I, the man they all assumed was weak, grieving, fading, had finally stepped back into the fight. One they never imagined I'd survive. One I intended to win. The sun had barely risen when Harper's message lit my phone. We need to talk. Now. No threats, just fear bleeding through the words. It was the first honest thing she'd said to me in months. I stared at it for a long moment before typing a single reply. What do you want? Her answer came instantly, as if she'd been staring at her phone all night. To save what's left. Julia saw the exchange over my shoulder. She knows she's losing ground, she said. Desperate people tell the truth by accident. Aaron sat at the small kitchen table, staring into a cup of untouched coffee. He looked worn down, the exhaustion clinging to him like a second skin. She must be terrified, he muttered. Ridgefall doesn't handle failure gently. She isn't my priority, I said, not anymore. But the truth was more complicated. If Harper had information Ridgefall didn't want exposed, she could still influence the next phase of this battle. Whether that made her an asset or a liability was a question I hadn't yet answered. Julia placed her tablet on the table. While you decide how to handle Harper, you should see this. She turned the screen toward me. Every major department at Ward Infrastructure had been thrown into disarray overnight. Ethics had opened an internal investigation. Procurement flagged unusual contract transfers. IT locked down several access points tied to Harper's credentials. And senior employees, many of whom had trusted her judgment, were suddenly scrambling to distance themselves. Keller had emailed me directly, if you can confirm your safety, the board would like a statement. Singh's message was shorter. Ridgefall is quiet. Too quiet. Julia folded her arms. This is the moment before collapse, Elias. Ridgefall feels the ground shifting. They're going to choose self-preservation over Harper. A text flashed across my phone, from an unlisted number. Mr. Ward Ridgefall Group has suspended all external communications. Consider that your only warning. Aaron inhaled sharply. Suspended. That means they're preparing a countermove, or an escape route. Either way, time was shrinking. We left the cabin with a plan, get information, stabilize the situation, and prevent Ridgefall from rewriting the story before the truth cleared daylight. But before we reached the truck, Lily ran out the front door. Grandpa. She held up her phone. You need to hear this. It was a voicemail from one of the field engineers at Ward Infrastructure. His voice trembled. Elias, they're asking questions about you. Ridgefall execs were here yesterday. They said you'd agreed to step down terms. But the board is pushing back. People are scared. Nobody knows what's real. Julia muttered, classic maneuver. Inject chaos claim control, let everyone drown in confusion. We won't let that happen, I said. As we drove, rain clouds gave way to a pale gray dawn. My phone buzzed again. Harper, please, just meet me. One conversation. Alone. I didn't respond. Instead, we headed toward the lake house, the place where everything fell apart and where the next step needed to begin. I parked on the gravel drive and stepped out, breathing in the cold morning air. The house loomed over us, no longer the home I once shared with my son, but a theater for every manipulation Harper had orchestrated. Inside, everything was a mess. Drawers open, papers strewn across the floor, a suitcase half-packed near the stairs. She had been preparing to flee. "She's unraveling," Julia whispered. No sooner had she finished speaking than Aaron's phone rang. He answered, then held it out toward me. "It's her," he said. I took it. Her voice was small. "Elias, are you here?" "Yes." "Please," she whispered, "come upstairs. Don't bring anyone else." "I'm done walking into your traps," I said. "This isn't a trap," she said, voice cracking. "It's a confession." Julia raised a brow. Aaron reached for the phone, desperate and conflicted. I turned to them. "Stay here." I climbed the stairs slowly, listening for movement. Halfway up, a floorboard creaked, not mine. Harper appeared at the landing, hair unkempt, eyes swollen from crying. She looked nothing like the polished, icy strategist who once controlled this house. She looked human, terrified. "You came," she breathed. "What do you want, Harper?" She gestured toward the bedroom. "Please, I need privacy." "No more rooms," I said firmly. "We stay right here." For a moment, she looked like she wanted to fight. Then she sagged against the wall. "They're going to bury me," she whispered. Ridgefall. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Dorian sent someone to my office last night. They took my laptop, my files, everything. They said I'd complicated the transition." Fear pulsed behind her eyes. "Do you know what Ridgefall does to people who fail them?" "Yes," I said quietly. "They erase them." She shook violently. "I didn't know what they were capable of. I thought—" "You thought you were untouchable." She flinched. "I can help you," I said, "surprising even myself, if you tell the truth." She stared at me as if I'd spoken in another language. "Why would you help me after everything I've done?" "Because Aaron loved you," I said, "and because truth matters more than revenge." For the first time, something in her broke completely. She slid down the wall, sitting on the floor. "I never meant to fall this deep," she whispered. "Ridgefall promised me influence, promised me power. They said I could reshape the company. They said you were in the way. They used you," I said. She nodded weakly. "Worse, they convinced me I was too smart to be used." I crouched in front of her. "Harper, I need names, meetings, documents." She pulled a thin envelope from her pocket. I kept copies. Some, anyway. Enough to show the board what Dorian planned. Enough to prove Aaron didn't sign those forms. My breath caught. This might be the leverage we needed. But the moment felt fragile too. Fragile. "Harper," I said softly, "you have a chance to make this right." Her eyes softened an expression I'd seen only once before, years ago at her wedding. But then a crash erupted downstairs. A door slamming. Voices, angry, sharp, authoritative. Julia called out, "Elias Ridgefall is here." Harper's eyes widened in terror. "They can't find me with you. They'll kill me. They'll kill all of us." I grabbed her arm. "We're leaving, now." Aaron shouted from the bottom of the stairs, "Dad." "They're inside." Panic surged through Harper. "You don't understand. They won't let you walk away with what you know." But she also didn't understand something. Neither would I. I pulled Harper up, half guiding, half dragging her toward the back staircase. Lily joined Aaron below, fear tightening her features. Julia grabbed my shoulder. "We need an exit plan." "Already have one," I said. "Follow me." We moved as a unit, Harper trembling. Aaron steeling himself, Lily clutching my coat, Julia scanning every shadow. Behind us, footsteps thundered through the house. Ridgefall had arrived to clean up their mess. But I wasn't their mess. Not anymore. We burst through the back door into the cold air. A voice shouted behind us. "Stop!" But we didn't. We ran across the yard as the sun finally cracked through the clouds, light breaking darkness wide open. This wasn't the ending Harper had feared. It wasn't the ending Ridgefall imagined. This was the moment everything they built on lies began to collapse. And the moment I decided I would burn their empire down. Not with rage, with truth, with evidence, with the strength they never believed I still had. As we reached the tree line, Harper gasped, "Elias, if you protect me, I'll give you everything." I didn't slow. "We don't need everything," I said. "We just need the truth." And behind us, Ridgefall's perfect little world finally started to crack. The forest swallowed us the moment we crossed into the tree line, branches dripping from the morning storm mud clinging to our shoes. Harper stumbled behind me, gasping, one hand clutching the envelope of documents as if it were the only thing keeping her alive. In many ways it was. "Slow down," Aaron called softly, breathless. "Dad, she can't keep up." Julia ahead of us stopped and scanned the woods. "We don't slow down, not until we're sure Ridgefall didn't follow." The tension in her voice pulled me forward again. We moved deeper, weaving through the undergrowth. Only when the voices behind us disappeared completely did I allow us to stop. Harper collapsed against a fallen log chest, heaving hair plastered to her cheeks. "They won't stop," she whispered. "Dorian doesn't forgive failure, and Ridgefall doesn't tolerate loose ends." I crouched in front of her. "Then give us everything, Harper, right now." She looked at me not with defiance this time, but with something closer to resignation. "You think I haven't burned for this already?" she said. "You think I haven't regretted it? I never wanted things to go this far. I never wanted you hurt." "Don't rewrite history now," I said gently, but firmly. "You hurt me long before Ridgefall did." Her eyes flickered with something like shame. We walked another half-mile through the woods until we reached the old ranger shelter, a forgotten concrete structure barely standing after decades of harsh seasons. It wasn't much, but it had walls and a roof, and most importantly, no windows facing the main road. Inside, dust hung in the air like suspended breath. Julia shut the heavy door and slid the broken lock into place. "Talk," she said to Harper. Harper hesitated, gripping the envelope. Her fingers trembled. Aaron stood on the opposite side of the shelter, arms crossed, expression stiff but wounded. She looked at him first. "Aaron," her voice cracked, "I know you don't believe me, but I didn't fall in love with you because of the company. I didn't target you. Ridgefall came later." He swallowed hard. "Then why did you hide everything from me?" "Because they promised me you'd succeed," Harper said, eyes filling. "They said you'd never grow while Elias controlled the company. They said you deserved a chance to lead. I wanted a life with you, a future." "That wasn't your decision," Aaron whispered, "and it wasn't yours to take from him." Harper shut her eyes, and tears slipping free. "I know." I stepped between them gently. "Harper, no, we can't fix the past right now. But we can prevent Ridgefall from crushing all of us. Show me what you brought." Hands shaking, she opened the envelope. Inside were printed emails, contract drafts, and something I didn't expect, photos. Taken through office windows. Of me, of Aaron, of my senior engineers, of private meetings, of confidential blueprints for upcoming municipal projects. My stomach tightened. "This is surveillance," I said. Harper nodded miserably. "Ridgefall used me to gather everything. Patterns, vulnerabilities, leadership structure. They needed to know how to replace you without triggering suspicion." Julia looked through the documents quickly. "This is enough to bury Dorian Shaw." Harper shook her head. "Not just him. Ridgefall's vice chair, their general counsel, 3 of their strategists. They built this for years," Aaron whispered, "and you helped them." Harper's breath caught. I thought I could control it. I thought it would be temporary. But once Ridgefall had leverage, they owned me. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. "Harper, I need total honesty. Did Ridgefall ever plan to keep Aaron in leadership?" Her answer came without hesitation. "No," she whispered. "They planned to remove him too, after the transition." Aaron turned away, shoulders shaking. Julia snapped a photo of the documents. "I'm sending these to Graves. He'll know what to do." Harper grabbed her wrist. "No, not yet." "You don't understand." Julia yanked free. "I understand perfectly. You're stalling." "No," Harper cried. "I'm trying to save us." "Save yourself, you mean?" Julia shot back. Harper backed against the wall, eyes darting desperately between us. "You don't know what they're capable of." "If you know something we don't," I said quietly, "now is the time." Harper pressed her hands to her face. "Dorian didn't come after me last night because of the documents. He came because I warned the board earlier this week. I sent an anonymous tip saying a hostile takeover was underway." Julia's jaw dropped. "You did what they didn't respond," Harper said. "I thought they ignored it. But Ridgefall found out. They punished me. I absorbed this quietly. She had tried to warn them. Too late. Too clumsily. But she tried." "Why didn't you tell me?" Aaron whispered. "Because I didn't want you to hate me sooner," she whispered back. The room fell silent. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Graves. "We've secured injunctions. Asset freeze is active. Ridgefall can't touch the company. I need you at my office. Now." Relief washed through me so sharp it almost hurt. Julia smiled faintly. He did it. Aaron let out a shaky breath. Harper sagged with exhaustion, but not relief. She still looked hunted. Before I could process that, another message popped onto my screen. From a number with no ID. "We know where you are." I felt the blood drain from my face. Julia's expression hardened. "They're tracking someone. Either you or Harper." Harper stepped forward, voice trembling. "It's me." I turned off my main phone, but Ridgefall installed tracking hardware inside my backup. I didn't know until last night. Panic spiked. "How long?" I asked. "Since yesterday afternoon." Julia grabbed her coat. "We need to move. Right now." Aaron put an arm around Lily, guiding her away from the shelter wall. "Dad, where do we go?" "To Graves," I said. "No," Julia countered. "Graves's office will be surrounded. They'll predict that move." She was right. Another buzz lit my phone. From the unknown number again. "Walk away, Elias. Last warning." I stared at the screen. Something inside me, the last remnants of fear, snapped. "No," I whispered. This time not to them, to myself, no louder now. "I won't walk away." Julia watched me waiting. "We're not running anymore," I said. "We're going to fight, but on our terms. We go back to the Foundation, my house. The one Harper thought she controlled. It's private, isolated, and surrounded by 2 acres of land. Graves can meet us there after securing transport." Dad, Aaron began. I shook my head. Harper wanted that house. Ridgefall wanted that house. They tied everything to it. It's time I take it back. Harper stared at me breathless. "You're going back." "I am," I said. "With my family." "And me," she whispered. I looked at her, broken, guilty, terrified. "You come," I said quietly, "because you need protection, and because you have answers. Ridgefall will try to silence." Her lips parted as if she couldn't believe it. Julia nodded slowly. "He's right. The safest place is the one Ridgefall thinks you're too afraid to return to." Aaron put a hand on my shoulder. "Whatever happens, I'm with you, Dad." Lily nodded fiercely. "So am I." We gathered the documents, secured them inside my jacket, and stepped into the clearing. The morning light was brighter now, streaking through the trees. Harper hovered between us, no longer the woman who mocked me at the kitchen island. No longer the strategist who schemed behind closed doors. Just a woman cornered by the empire she helped build. As we walked toward the truck, she whispered, "Elias, why are you helping me?" I looked ahead, the gravel crackling beneath my boots. "Because truth matters more than punishment," I said. "And because tomorrow, the world will know exactly who took advantage of whom." She swallowed hard. And tonight, I met her eyes. Tonight, I said, we reclaim everything they tried to steal. Behind us, the shelter door slammed shut in the wind. Ahead of us, the house waited like a battleground. We walked toward it together, broken, bruised, but no longer afraid. And Ridgefall, for the first time, had reason to fear us. The house looked different when we returned, not because anything had been moved, but because everything had been revealed. The truth had stripped away whatever illusions had once lived here. The walls held memories I still cherished, but the shadows held betrayals I would never forget. It stood before us, not as a home, but as the final place where everything would be settled. Aaron hesitated on the front porch, staring at the door he once walked through every day without fear. "Dad, are you sure about this?" "Yes," I said. "This house belonged to your mother and me long before Harper ever touched the doorknob. It's time we took it back." Julia checked her phone one last time. "Graves should be on his way. He'll bring legal security and a police liaison. Once we deliver the documents, Ridgefall won't have any angle left." "And?" Harper, Lily asked gently. I looked over my shoulder. Harper stood a few steps behind, arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if she no longer had the right to stand closer. She looked smaller, not physically, but spiritually, as though the lies she had woven had collapsed under their own weight and left her exposed. "She stays until Graves arrives," I said quietly. "After that, she makes her statements, and we let justice handle her part." Harper's eyes watered, not in manipulation this time, but in understanding. Inside, the house felt strangely still. The air held its breath. The living room, the stairs, the kitchen, they all bore silent witness to the night my life fractured. Now they watched as we pieced ourselves back together. We settled around the dining table. Julia spread out the last of the documents, emails, forged signatures, photos, and the most damning piece, the strategic roadmap Ridgefall had prepared to dismantle ward infrastructure from the inside. Harper sat across from us, hands trembling as she added her own evidence to the pile. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Not just for what I did, but for how long I pretended you wouldn't see through me." Aaron dropped his gaze. He couldn't look at her, not yet. "Maybe not ever." "You didn't have to be part of this," he said. "You could have asked for help. You could have trusted us." Harper shook her head. "I trusted the wrong people instead. And by the time I realized what Ridgefall really wanted, I was already trapped." I finished for her. Her eyes met mine. "Yes." She started to say more, but a sudden vibration rattled the table, my phone lighting up with a message from Graves. "I'm pulling into your driveway. Sit tight." Relief washed through me, warm and solid. "We're nearly done," I told everyone. "Just a few more minutes." But as soon as the words left my mouth, headlights flashed through the window, followed by the crunch of tires on gravel. Then another set of headlights. My pulse quickened. "That's not Graves." Julia moved to the window, peering out carefully. "It's Ridgefall." 3 black SUVs, doors opening in unison, shadows moving. Harper's breath hitched. No, they weren't supposed to find me here." "Don't panic," I said, though my heart hammered in my chest. "They can't hurt us with everything we know." "They don't need to hurt you," Harper said in a trembling whisper. "They just need to scare you enough to surrender everything." Aaron put an arm around Lily, guiding her toward the hallway. "Dad," I know I said, "stay behind me." The front door shook as someone pounded against it. "Open up, Mr. Ward," a male voice shouted. "We're here on behalf of Ridgefall Group to negotiate terms." Negotiate, yes, but not the kind that came with pens and contracts. Julia stepped beside me, her hand hovering near her pocket. "We stall them until Graves arrives." The pounding grew louder. I steadied myself, inhaled deeply, and opened the door. 3 men stood on my porch, slick hair, expensive suits, dampened by missed expressions, polished but predatory. The man in front smiled without warmth. "Mr. Ward," he said, "we're disappointed by how things have escalated. We'd like to resolve matters quietly." "You mean off the record," I replied. "Of course," he said. "No need for scandal. No need for regulators. You give us the documents, and we ensure your retirement proceeds comfortably. Your family stays safe." His smile sharpened. Behind me, Harper exhaled shakily. The man's eyes flicked to her, lingered, then returned to me. "Bring her out," he said. "She and I have unfinished business." Harper stepped back until her spine hit the wall. "No," I said simply. The man's expression cooled. "You don't get to decide that." "She's in my house," I said. "Tonight I do decide." Before he could respond, the roar of another engine cut through the tension. A police cruiser pulled into the driveway, followed by a sedan I recognized instantly. Michael Graves stepping out with a briefcase in hand. The Ridgefall representative stiffened. Graves approached calmly, as if greeting old colleagues. "Gentlemen," he said. "Perfect timing. The police will escort you off the property now." The officer stepped forward. "This is a private residence. You were not invited. Leave immediately or face trespassing charges." The men faltered. Graves turned to me. "Elias, do you have the documents?" I handed them over. He flipped through the pages, nodding. "This is more than enough. Conspiracy, coercion, forged authorization, unlawful surveillance, attempted hostile acquisition. Ridgefall is finished." The lead man's mask slipped. "You don't know what you're doing." "On the contrary," Graves said. "I know exactly what I'm doing, and so will the Attorney General when he reads this in an hour." The police officer stepped closer. "Last chance. Leave." The Ridgefall men retreated slowly, fury simmering beneath their composure. Their SUVs pulled away, engines snarling like threatened wolves. When the last vehicle disappeared down the road, Harper sank into a chair, shaking violently. Graves placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You'll need to testify," he said. "You won't be alone, but the truth has to come from you." She nodded, tears falling silently. Aaron sat beside her, not out of love, but out of closure. "You hurt us," he said quietly, "but you won't hurt us again." She nodded again, unable to look him in the eye. Graves turned to me next. "You did it, Elias. You turned the whole thing around." "No," I said softly. "I just stopped letting them turn me." Julia smiled at that. Marjorie would be proud. My chest warmed with a familiar ache. I hope so. Later, after the police left and Graves took Harper to safety, the house emptied into peaceful quiet. Lily curled up on the sofa next to Aaron. I stood by the window watching fog lift from the lake. For the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again, steady, rooted, whole. She said I wouldn't last a week without them. She had no idea who I was without them. She had no idea how strong a man becomes when he stops accepting the version of himself others try to shape. I walked outside, breathing in the cold, clean air. The garden Marjorie planted rustled gently. The lake shimmered. The house stood tall, scarred, but ours again. My story wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the truth, reclaiming my voice, my family, my legacy. And here's what I've learned. When someone underestimates your strength, they reveal their own weakness. When someone tries to take everything from you, they forget that truth has a way of rising unstoppable, undeniable. If you've ever been underestimated, if someone ever tried to dictate your worth, your future, or your strength, I'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments. Tell me the moment you realized you were done being small for someone else's comfort. And if you want more stories, where destined justice finds its way home, where the quiet ones rise, where truth wins. In the end, stay here with me. Subscribe, follow along, and let's keep these stories alive together. Because some people build their lives on lies, but some of us, we rebuild from the truth and come back stronger than anyone ever expected.